Thanks so much. This is going to be an exciting webinar. As many of you are probably aware, the role of solution consulting and pre-sales has been changing, but really, we found there's not really a consensus beyond that for how it's changing or in what way. And that's the topic of today's webinar. Going to explore some of the different perspectives on the changing role in 2025 and specifically tactically what you need to do to be ready for some of those changes. I'm excited for today's discussion, and I'm going to be certainly taking notes, learning a lot from it as well myself. First, I do want to thank our sponsor. Thank you very much to our partner, Reprise, today for sponsoring the webinar. Reprise, if you're not aware who they are, well, first off, they're the premier sponsor of the PreSales Collective for 2025. Reprise helps their customers scale the great work pre-sales and solutions engineers do by providing rock-solid demo environments for their live demos. So if you're looking to transform your enterprise demo strategy, win more deals, you can check them out at reprise.com. Let's get into it. Let me first introduce our panel. First, hosting our webinar today and guiding the conversation is Bill Balnave. He is the VP of Technical Services at Mesmo. He's a diehard solution consultant and a firm believer in the power of value of solution consulting for the entire tech industry. Thanks so much, Bill, for joining.
Absolutely.
Second, we have Chris Mabry, who I'm sure you all know Chris, but I'm going to introduce him anyways. He's an overall pre-sales enthusiast. Many of you know him from his role here at the Pre-Sales Collective as the former general manager, and currently he is the VP of Solutions and Partnerships over at Reprise. Next, Katie Arnoff. We have two Katies with us today. She leads the solutions consulting team for library software at Clarivate. She spent her last 11 years with the company, joining as a solution consultant before moving into her current leadership role. And welcome Katie Sedgwick. She has spent over 20 years in cloud technology, the last 10 years specifically at SAP, serving as a first and second level leader in both North and Latin America. So that's our panel. We're very excited for everyone. Thanks everyone for joining. Welcome to everyone on the panel. Again, I'm looking forward to the conversation. And as people are trickling in, reminder to anyone who just joined, please make sure to switch your Zoom chat settings to everyone instead of the default host and panel, so that as you're joining, your messages are going out to everybody. And make sure you throw any questions you have into that Q&A for the end of the session. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Bill. Take it away.
Thanks, Jack. I appreciate it. Hey, everybody. Very glad to have you here. Very excited for this conversation. This is a topic that I feel like I've had the opportunity to enjoy talking about for like the last 6 months. A lot of thoughts about what's happening in our profession, and really feel like we're at an inflection point, and in a very good way. Like, I think the future for solutions consulting is going to just get bigger and broader and more exciting. And very happy to talk to these three most amazing leaders about it today. I thought what we would do before we kind of get into the meat of the conversation, I always love a good origin story. But to Chris Mabry's point earlier, as we were talking before this, not the 4-hour version of the origin story, but maybe like the, the 15, 20-second kind of highlight reel of the origin story. But I'd like to have each of you talk about how you got into solutions consulting. So maybe Katie A, will start with you, and then we'll just go around.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Glad to be here. My origin story is one that I think is fairly common for a lot of us. I was working as a practitioner in the field that I now sell into. I'm a librarian. I was working in a library, and I was approached by a recruiter who said, "Are you interested in learning more about this position?" And they wouldn't tell me who the company was. I was able to figure it out. And I said to myself, well, if somebody asks if you're interested in learning more, you should probably say yes. And I think I had a job offer.
Good advice.
Yes, that's my major piece of advice for today is if somebody asks a question like that, just say yes. I had a job offer within, I think, 10 days. It happened very quickly. And then at that point I had to, it was a long time ago, well, relatively. And at that point I had to actually make the decision to make the leap, which I did, obviously, because I'm here, and I think it was a good one. But I think what a lot of us have in common there is the idea that you know a particular field very well, you've worked in it, you understand the challenges of it. That means that you are in a good position to be able to sell into that specific field that you come from. So that's my origin story.
Awesome. I love it. And I always love those kinds of things. And I guess I'll do a really quick follow-up question just because I'm curious.
Sure.
Did you find it really difficult to go from what I would say is like a non-technical role to a potentially more technical role?
No, I mean, I think that librarians and people who work in libraries do a lot that is technical in the context of that field. A lot of the work I was doing was helping our patrons to understand how to use the technology that the college I worked at provided. Some of that was very basic, some of it was more complicated. And technical in my field just kind of means understanding what the technology does. And in that sense, I was well positioned to move into a role selling the same kinds of systems that I had been using for a number of years already. I think that's another thing that I like to emphasize when I talk about pre-sales with people is it is not all super technical programmer coding wizard with the keyboard type of work. A lot of it is just understanding the everyday challenges that your customers are facing, whatever that means in their particular space.
Yeah, that's perfect, Katie. And kind of why I asked the question. I think many people look
Yeah,
at it or might be intimidated by that. Like, don't be, right?
right,
Yeah. All
exactly.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. So Katie, yes, how about you?
Yeah, so I accidentally found pre-sales. I was working on the services side of a small startup. And if you work for a small startup, you know there's a lot of times where you're asked to flex different muscles and cover different areas. It's a really great learning opportunity and advantage of that environment. Someone was going to be out on leave and I got asked to cover. I said yes, and I never looked back. What I loved is how you got to be visionary and a problem solver with customers. So, inheriting something that maybe wasn't the right way we should be doing this, I get to start at the ground floor and really uncover the problem and build the solution collaboratively. And that's what I loved. And that's why now, 20 years later, I'm still in pre sales.
Amazing. I love it. I love it. Fantastic. Mr. Mabry.
Yeah, so early on, I worked at startups and I got into network engineering. I found myself working in a basement, and I was not the basement type. Like no windows, we called it the dungeon is what we called it. And some people love the dungeon. The dungeon wasn't for Chris Mabry. And if anybody's worked in a basement before, please let us know in the chat because I think that's strangely common. And I'll never forget, I listened to my first sales call across the hall at a startup I was at as an implementation manager. And I went up to that seller and I said, I want to learn how you do that. I fell in love with it right away. And that's when I got into solutions engineering.
Amazing. Yeah. So I was I'm going to call it a logical basement dweller because where I worked, the IT folks, while we were on a upper floor, might as well have been a basement, right? Because we would go down to where the business was. And it's like, wow, look at all the great carpet and the nice furniture and all of those kinds of things. And a guy that I worked with got out of the basement and I asked him, like, what are you doing now? What is this job? He's like, I fly around, I tell people about the software, and they pay me a lot of money. And I'm like, how do you do that? How do you do that? So I just got to know the same recruiter, and yeah, like KDS, never looked back once I got in it. So it's been just an amazing profession. So let's talk about this profession that we love so much and the future of it and where we see it going. But before we get into the future, let's talk about, I'd love to know what you all think we need to leave behind, either purposely leave behind or we'll end up leaving behind in 2024. And Chris, I'll start with you. What are we leaving behind in 2024?
Yeah, what I'm leaving behind and what I think actually really advanced organizations have already left behind is single-threaded influence. Okay. What I'm pushing for is pre-sales influence to be tied to think like board level metrics, like customer acquisition costs, gross revenue retention, pipeline generation. And when you attach yourself to these high level metrics, you're no longer just doing a demo or that activation. You're spreading the wonderful influence, the knowledge you already have across the organization, leaving that behind in 24.
I like that. And like it's high time to do so, right? Like we know as SCs, we have the ability to influence the business in a lot of different ways. And like it's about time we took ownership of that and started doing it. I like that a lot, Chris. KDA, what do you think we're leaving behind in 2024?
Well, working in basements for one thing.
Unless you like working in basements, like I'm not
unless,
gonna,
unless it's your thing. When I was recruited for this job, I was working in a basement, and because I live in New England, we once had snow plowed from the sidewalk through the window into the basement where I was working. So that was that was
get
an
out
interesting
of the basement.
experience. Yes, getting out of the basement, and I think in terms of pre-sales, what that also means is I am taking a very hard look right now at anything that kind of walks, talks, acts like an unqualified demo. And I think we all know that nobody comes up to you and says, I need you to do a demo, and I have done no work with the customer to figure out what they need or whether this is the right step. They will try to sell you on just joining a call, or the customer is really ready to sign, they're interested in such and such a product, and then you get on the call and you find out that none of that is true and that you've kind of been sold something. So I am trying to push back on that more in ways that are both structured and also kind of relying on my spidey sense. One of the big things that's involved with that is, I think, not answering every single RFP that crosses our door, being a lot more selective about that. So I think in 2025, I want to focus on where we can have the most impact. And that means sometimes having some uncomfortable conversations with the sales team about things that they need to handle before they get back to me and bring us in where we can make the biggest difference.
Mm-hmm.
I like that a lot. So let's get rid of some of that old school, like, hey, SE, show up, do the demo, where I tell you, when I tell you, and then go away again, and be
right.
like what we should be, which is a real partner to selling and a real partner to the business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Love
Exactly.
it. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's leave that one behind in 2024. That's good. All right. ADS, what do you got?
I think it's the line or the boundary of this is pre-sales, this is post-sales, that's not my job, is my job. That line is becoming blurred.
This is why I saved you for last, by the way, because I knew you were gonna like this. I think this is a great conversation. So please.
Because I think, especially as cloud companies are realizing the value of adoption. It's not just acquiring new customers. That's great. We still got to do that, but retaining those customers and growing those customers. And that is where I am seeing us have more of a role and a voice, not only when it's time to renew or we need to sell another product, but really helping maintain and drive that adoption and that success from day one. So I think that's going to mean we're going to be involved in a lot more areas that we haven't traditionally been involved in. And we've oftentimes says, that's not my job. And I don't think it's a climate that we really say, that's not my job. I think it's an opportunity for us to learn more and have a bigger influence on the business and tie into those metrics that Chris was talking about. So not just how many deals are we closing, but what's our renewals impact as well.
Man, I agree with you 100%. And I would say to any SE out there who finds themselves in a situation where they say, oh, that's not my job, don't be in that situation. Like as SEs, you've got an opportunity to have impact on all areas of the business. You've got a unique perspective, especially in the go-to-market life cycle. So yeah, take those opportunities. That's how we get to leave some of these things behind in 2024. So I'm curious, I want to stick with this kind of pre-sales bleeding into post-sales, and maybe it's more about solutions, or it's about the customer relationship, or whatever that happens to be. And I would say, Chris and KDA, are both of you seeing the same kind of motion from your perspective, or no?
Go
Start
ahead,
with you, Chris. Oh, or let's go to Katie. Yeah.
Sure. I think so. For my team, we are in a pretty complex matrix sales organization in a very large company, and we sell enterprise level products. So the layers that sit between us and the stages in the customer life cycle between my team and the world of post sales, there are more of them, and it's a bit more complicated than I think it is for some of the people who are likely listening to this call. We have the implementation teams, we have technical support, we have customer success. So what I have always tried to do is to position the customers when they leave my hands to have a good experience in the subsequent stages. And in the world of libraries, there's been a lot of vendor consolidation. We are one of the big players. We're also one of the oldest ones. We've been around since the 80s. We have customers who have been with us for more than 30 years. We have library deans that have bought our solutions multiple times as they've moved from one job to the next. We see the same people all the time. So I need to maintain good relationships with them. If you have a falling out with somebody, it can have ramifications that you don't yet understand in this field as everybody moves around, but basically stays in our world. So I try to have an eye on the bigger picture. I wouldn't say my team is really doing post-sales work. I'm not advocating for them to be doing that. It's I think a more complicated question for us and something I've been trying to keep us away from a little bit, to be honest with you. But I know that
Interesting.
that is an answer that's different for some other people. What I want to maintain a focus on is we are one part of a larger, long-term, complex relationship with this customer, and we want to set them up for success. That's the perspective I have on it, being in a more strictly defined position.
Yeah, no, it's good. I think that's important. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, to Katie's point, this is one of those it depends kind of answers on size, scale, and maturity models. Early stage organizations, it's very easy and likely that the solutions team has a massive hand in customer success, retention. SaaS is a retention game. But as we have scaled and in an enterprise playbook, we're actually not managing that. Although as a VP, I'm partially structured in my plan to be responsible for retention and renewals. It is not a driving force for us as an organization. But to Katie's point, every time I like this analogy, every time you throw the ball over the fence, guess what? You're introducing risk to the deal. Every time you're introducing risk, you're introducing a little pain point. We can do a very good job of owning the transition so that it's as smooth as possible. My solution engineers, they're not success in their role does not equal excellent CX work. It equals great partnership in pre-sales, and so that's the line I've drawn.
Interesting. I want to dig into this a little more, and I'll step away from being a host and pretend I'm a panelist and offer a little bit of kind of what I'm thinking. I also want to call out though, Ellie Scripps. I grabbed your question from the chat, so we will absolutely get to this whole notion of like renewals and SE and customer success working together, which I think is kind of what we're starting to talk about right now. I would tell you from my perspective, if I step back and look at the entire kind of go-to-market lifecycle, from I go find customers to I renew them and expand them, and they're amazing. Like to your point about fences, Chris, and I like the analogy. It seems to me that there are too many fences that a potential buyer has to step over to get to what they want, right? And they're starting to, like, I start with this SDR, and then I go to a rep, and then I go to an SC, and then I go to this other CS person, couple of this other person, and all that. Like, it's very complicated, right? And you've got to talk to 5 or 6 people, sometimes before you even get to see demo and product, right? So we see this whole shift of people doing their own research, and the evaluation begins based on what's available on your website and what they can see and learn. And a lot of times I think vendors that don't have good information there, they kind of jump, like they fall off the list. So, and I'm getting to a point. So when a customer or a potential prospect finally reaches out, they're educated, they're not interested in being educated, they have specific questions, and they want to get right to the tell me how you would do this thing for me, right? So my thought is this. As an SE, maybe before I started here and I was educating the customer, and that was the first couple of demos, then we got to the very specifics about their solution, and it became very much more about, there's this transition where it becomes very much more about the customer and being specific and showing their specific things, and then it flows into customer success. Well, I think that first part is almost gone, because as buyers are coming to us, they've already done a trial, they've already done some work on their own, maybe they've worked with the product in a previous place, and what they're looking for is very specific things to them. It's almost like they already are customers. So the more SEs can think in terms of how a technically oriented customer success person would think, I think the better. I think the other side of it is a lot of customer success folks have been more focused on relationship, commercials, and renewal, and less on the technology and advising customers on how to use that technology. And I think the CS role has to transition to be more like that, which is why I feel like SEs kind of get pulled into that post-sale motion so much. It's like the customer's looking for very technically oriented, so, things and answers and all of that a lot of CS folks aren't necessarily equipped to provide. So in the context of all that, and this was, I knew this would be one of the topics. I think it's on a lot of people's minds. I'm curious. Katie asked, what do you see are the kind of maybe the biggest barriers for a blending of kind of pre and post sales, or one person being able to do both roles?
I think part of it is attitude of that's not my job. And that, if we're in pre-sales, we like to be involved in a lot of things where we're talking to product and marketing and customers and being able to really cover all of those points. And so sometimes it's just that attitude. But I think, regardless of your organizational structure, there are ways that you can be embracing just thinking about what's best for customer, because that's really what our goal is, of what's best for customer, what's the best solutions, all of that. So, it can be advising as you're building the BOM, what is the right things that need to be a part of this. Maybe they're asking for everything and you realize we actually really need to start here. Historically, it's been better if we go here, and you're advising and saying, I don't think this is the right time to do this. I think we should do this instead. That can help influence and set up a better post-sales experience. We've all been in the situation where it's the 11th hour, the customer is leaving, they're not renewing, they're going to the competitor, and we get brought in to throw a Hail Mary and fix it and find that silver bullet to save everything. The idea with this is, how can we get ahead of that so we're not in this responsive last minute, it's too late to do something. Something that we started to do when I was at SAP was to, just like you have a forecast call talking about your net new business, what you're planning to close, talking proactively about renewals a couple of quarters in advance. What's going to be coming up? Where do we see risk? Where has there been something that fell off the rails that we didn't get to that finish line for their implementation that we might want to proactively have a conversation for? And then one other thing you can be doing, great shout out to my team who is in Argentina, is they did a practice where they would look at what are there going to be new topics of things that multiple customers would want to know about. We've added a new aspect to the product. How could I do a one-to-many educational type session, typically targeting existing customers? It might become an upsell for us, but it could also lead to building some more pipeline. It was a really great way to think about being proactive, seeing an opportunity of where we could have a voice with our customers and being able to share that.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. So I think as you can achieve those things, you should, and it's good. I'm thinking, Katie, about what you were saying about, like, in a lot of situations, there may be there's just too much involved in the relationship. You kind of need to have maybe the demarcation and both roles.
Mm-hmm.
In your mind, how do we remove the fences and smooth that over and make that so to Ellie's question, how do we optimize SE and CS working together so that it's not a hurdle and it's not it's not preventative?
I think a big part of this is relationship building across the organization, and especially, for me at the leadership level, I know my counterparts on the customer success side, and I speak with them pretty frequently, and they know that there are certain things. There are a couple of topics where I am the expert on that, and sometimes they will bring me in because I'm just the person who knows the most about that. We have to have flexibility in our relationships to bring the right people to the table at the right times. I don't think anybody particularly likes the high stakes of being brought in to, save the day, as KDS was just saying. I've been the person kind of dragged into the room, and you're sitting there in front of the customer and you have to do a certain amount of groveling and then offer a solution. It's not the best feeling, but if you have an understanding through good relationships about the right people to have at the table, I think that can help. In terms of the fences that exist early in the customer relationship and their journey with you, I think sometimes, especially larger companies, we need to learn how to get out of our own way. And I have had conversations with my colleagues in the account management teams and the SDR teams about, you can't treat all the products like they're the same. If you would offer a certain pathway for one of our products that is a database of articles and information, that's not the path you should be offering for the things that my team sells. But let's talk about how you can set up the customer for success so that by the time they get to us, they're not frustrated and annoyed and they've talked to 5 people who don't know anything. We need to be able to be flexible in all aspects of our business.
Yeah, and I feel like we could, like, there's a whole webinar on just what you just said, like, how do you create that flexibility and how do you create a culture where it doesn't matter what your role is or whose job it is or whatever, like, you're just grabbing the right person at the right time
Right.
to plug them into the customer based on what the customer needs and how do you drive that. So Jack, I don't know, maybe write that down, like, let's do a webinar on that, because I think that would be
on being the right person.
yeah, I think that would be amazing. I kind of want to keep rolling a little bit with this topic. At some point, I do want to transition more to talking about kind of career progression and how this affects the individual SE and SE leaders. But I want to grab a couple of questions that I've seen pop up. So Rich Bolton is asking, he likes the what's best for the customers, for the customer phrase, but it's a difficult KPI. Do we have any suggestions of KPIs to measure when our role stretches across the business? Like, what should we be looking at? And Chris, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I would say anytime I'm looking for a KPI that has like a widespread of different responsibilities, I always just go up and up and up. Like if you were reporting to a board and you were responsible for retention and new business, maybe even expansion, get those under your belt and just make sure that you can track and understand what the targets are and how you're tracking towards those targets. I would say if you're responsible for it, there should be something to measure it. And if you're having a hard time understanding how to track that metric, somebody is. Okay, that's what the board cares about. Find out who is and find out what dashboard they look at, what report they look at, get a hold of it and save it on your bookmarks.
Love that. That's good. KDS, what would you add to that?
I'd say I think one of the hard things that we have with KPIs, at least I've experienced as a leader at a big company, is consistency of the data to put together a complete picture of what's happening. This region does it this way, this region does it this way, this line of business tracks it different than this. And so I think even more than what KPIs, working with your peers and your counterparts in your leadership to achieve consistency helps you really set a level playing field. So we're all measuring this. And we're really looking at that in the same way, because the cost of sale or the point of involvement could be very different as there's different processes and practices and data capture happening. We tried to look at really getting to things at a very specific deal level, but we found just because of how sales used CRM and what some of their processes of things getting discontinued, we actually had to elevate it and look at more at the account level. And if I'm touching this account, that means I'm somehow influencing this customer. But those conversations with your peers, the people who are doing the data, but also your peers as leaders and teammates, is really valuable here.
Yeah, that's good. KDA, anything to add around KPIs?
Yeah, I think sometimes with KPIs, it can be hard to untangle the action from the result. And I see this with our customers too. If you think about a customer who tells you, my job is to click this button in the software, and you know that their job is actually to drive a certain outcome within their business. It's a similar idea with us, that I think sometimes it's easy to measure something where you can say, so-and-so did a thing, and it's harder to understand how to measure the outcome that you're driving towards. But measuring the action can lead you to misunderstand what's happening, and it can leave you with kind of nonsense data that just says my people were in these places doing these things at this time, and they don't necessarily tell you what the outcome of that activity was. I used to have a boss who really was not a fan of flat activity reporting for that business. He would say, I'm much more interested in understanding what happened as a result of what you were doing. So I think that's the key, is identify what you want to be affecting in the business with your actions and try to measure that where you can. That is not always an easy thing to do, but it's that question of where are you really having influence as opposed to where are you just doing things. Doing things is not always, I could be doing a lot but not having a lot of impact.
God, amen. I have to say, like, this touches a nerve with me a little bit. Katie, yes, I love what you said about consistency. I think there are, like, when you talk about KPIs, data, metrics, whatever, there are two C's. It's consistency being one. Like, what is it? Where does that number come from? What are you actually measuring? Are you measuring the same things that I'm measuring? But then, Katie, what you just said, I would call that context. Like, don't just show me a number. Like, why do I care about that number? And I remember a point in my career leading a pre-sales team where I would go to a QBR and I would say, hey, we did 60 proof of values last quarter. Great. Thanks, Bill. Next, like, moving on, right? Like, who cared? It didn't really matter. The next quarter I came back and I said, 76% of the time that we did a POV, we closed the deal. Oh, hey, wait a minute. Now that's way more interesting. And it was like, okay, well, what happened in those POVs and what did you do? And like, all of a sudden we turned it from this is what we did, the action, to because we did these things, these are the outcomes that we were able to drive. Like, that's huge. And then all of a sudden, like, the CEO is like, hey, Bill, show me these metrics. Like, tell me, like, you're actually talking about the business, people get excited. And I think it's a good thing. So yeah, I mean, great discussion when it comes to KPIs. And I think consistency and context are huge. All right, so let's start to transition a little bit more. The other thing I was thinking about is, in addition to starting to take on some post-sale related stuff, what additional new responsibilities do you guys see surfacing for SEs? And Katie, I'll start with you.
KDS or KDA?
KDA. Did I say KDA? Sorry, that was just kind of blended together, like KDA. KDA. Yes, KDA. Sorry.
I think that, new responsibilities, that can be a tricky thing. But I would probably just continue to build on what I was saying before about having a sense of the larger customer relationship. Whether you're doing direct work in post sales or not, understanding that our relationship with this customer goes beyond this one sales engagement with this one product. It probably extends into other areas of their operations. I deal strictly with software, but my company also sells information and database products of various kinds. We're selling to a university library. They probably have relationships with a number of our business units that sell them different things, and we need to be aware of that. So I think something that I've been emphasizing with my team, and I continue to emphasize, is understand the totality of what's going on here and think of yourself as a practitioner in this field and an extension of what's going on. So don't approach everything as I am moving from one sales engagement to the next or one customer to the next. Think about it as a larger relationship and a set of larger contributions.
I like it. That's good. Chris Mabry, what about you in terms of additional responsibilities coming?
Yeah, so to your question, Bill, I'm not sure. What I think of is we are the ones in charge of our responsibilities. I think as solutions leaders, we are the ones who set what success looks like within our organizations, and we set the criteria. And so I don't think of it as things that are coming on, and what I think of it is, what are the opportunities my team can address, and how can we define what great looks like in the organization? So I proactively ask and look at what success looks like for my org on a daily engagement basis. And if success is increasing conversions on POCs, or if success is adjusting culture to match goals of the organization, like net retention revenues and things like this, then I think we are the ones who are actively building more activations to drive that number. And that could be a, monthly top deal follow-ups. You could build a concierge team where you you identify your top 10 customers you need to keep happy in an enterprise world, and they visit them on site once a quarter. That's a very proactive sales version of a solutions consultant, but maybe that does tie to your retention KPI. So I kind of flip the script a little bit, and I just think of where can we insert ourselves and make the biggest impact, and then influence that.
You know, to jump in real quick with something
Yeah,
important
please.
Chris said is us as leaders kind of setting the tone of where we're going to be adding value, I think is really important. One of the exercises my team and I used was start, stop, continue. So think about a whiteboard. What do we want to, all the different things that we do. What do we want to start doing? What do we need to stop doing? What do we need to continue doing more of? You know, then think about laying that out on a continuum of most impact to least impact. So that way we're as a team cohesively agreeing and understanding the highest value activities that we can be doing and the things that we need to call out and acknowledge and agree together we need to stop doing. That might be highly customizing a very early stage demo. It might be just saying, yes, there's different things that we can acknowledge and agree upon and set that pace and tone for us.
I think that's fantastic. I'm going to grab and incorporate it. So thank you, KDS. I think that's a great way to look at things. However, and while I love your answer, Chris, I'm not going to let you off the hook, because I'm going to flip the question a little bit. And first of all, the fact that you look at the outcomes that we want to drive and say, what can my team do to help drive those outcomes, I think is 100% the right way to do it. But we all work in an ecosystem of a larger organization, all doing things and having expectations. So let me ask the question this way. What additional expectations do you think will be placed on SCs going into 2025 and beyond?
I think we will be more responsible for pipe gen, or what's considered pipe coverage. How much pipeline you have is pipe coverage, and conversions. You convert that pipeline into new business opportunities. I think that solution engineers and consultants are uniquely skilled in driving pipeline and in driving conversions in a way that our sellers are not, and in a way that our marketing team is not. I think that with the rise of AI, especially in marketing, think like the AI SDR, there's actually so much noise that you can undercut that noise with building real relationships, and solutions consultants are the right person to build that relationship. So I would say we will be forced to be more involved in how to convert and create pipeline, how to retain great customers. And we just do that with our superpower by connecting with those technical champions and providing real value.
We actually had that change happen 2 years ago when I was at SAP. We actually had a KPI for demand generation within pre-sales. And, you know, I will say a lot of my team was like, nope, that should not be my job.
Yep.
And, you know, we really had to think about how could we embrace a problem-solving attitude with this. And if you think about it, what really we can influence is building the right pipeline. So not inheriting a bunch of stuff that isn't qualified, isn't a right fit, but how can we build the right pipeline that's going to serve what we want to do and the deals we want to work on. And that was really where that change happened for us, where we could get excited about it.
Yeah. The more you insert there, you actually affect your destiny.
Love that. Right.
That's what you're doing.
Yeah. You're teeing up the right stuff as opposed to having to deal with other things. That's something that somebody else potentially tees up. And look, I think I've said this before, and even though I'm married to one, I still believe it. Like, I think SDR is probably the hardest job in tech sales. And part of the reason I think it's the hardest job is, like, a lot of those folks don't necessarily have the depth of expertise or things like that we have. They aren't necessarily pulled from being in position to then turn around and talk to, right? So they're struggling to try, like, make themselves relevant to the people that they're trying to sell to, just because they want to find the right people and then get them moved along. And I think it's hugely beneficial when the SE organization and the SDR organization kind of can come together, and SDRs and SEs spend time. And even if it's just like, hey, does this message seem right? Is this the right person to reach out to? How would you say this? How would you respond to that kind of stuff? It can be just very basic things like that. But I think it has, to your point, I think it has a huge impact to then downstream in the go-to-market life cycle, like the right people being teed up to come together. So I love that. I don't know, KDA, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the question of, what we will be doing or what we should be doing, what we'd like to see ourselves doing in 2025 and beyond is very closely tied to the question of where do we have influence in the organization and how does that relate to the vision that we might have for our own work. I am trying to start a conversation right now and continue a conversation about kind of getting my team out of the product. I think this is something we all talked about in the prep for this conversation, that a lot of us had thoughts on this. The idea of, not always being positioned as the product expert. I want to have conversations where we're being positioned more as the domain expert and think about that as a way to broaden our relationships within the company with customers, a way to have a different kind of influence and influence at different points in the sales cycle and the customer life cycle. I don't want to be, just sort of hemmed in as like the people you trot out who have the big demo website and they show somebody how to check a book out. That's very limiting. For us, it's very limiting for the sales team. It's ultimately quite limiting for the customers. We are at a point organizationally where we have a big flagship platform and we are introducing a lot of things that scaffold on top of that are upsell products. I can't have people tied to this vision of what we did that originates in 2012 and was fantastic at the time, but it's something that needs to evolve. I think this also speaks to another one of my favorite hobby horses, which is you are often kind of fighting the same battles over and over again and at different stages, and that's actually okay. Like, you need to be constantly reminding people of your value and of the contributions that you can make, and maybe relitigating some things that you've discussed with them before, just so that it doesn't fall off their list of priorities.
I love that, of really thinking about your expertise as an advisor beyond just the product. We're in this because we love the product. We're working where we are because we really love what we're doing. But this is a great opportunity to really think about, how can I advise and share a point of view as a thought leader,
right,
an industry expert, a process expert. I would encourage everyone to really think about, where do you feel like your expertise is and where do you want to grow your expertise? And then how do you become known by that? I actually put a link in the chat of a post that I saw on LinkedIn this week of someone who used to be on my team, and they did a really great job of having that voice and sharing what their expertise is. And if you notice, nothing in this post talks about product. It's all about a different expertise that we can bring. I think that's really powerful.
I could not agree with you more. And I'm thinking to myself and wondering, like, what would you tell an SE? Because I think there's an overall change in expectations, right? There's an expectation that people in the company have of SEs and what they do. What we're talking about is we want that expectation to change. So KDS, how do you think about bringing about that change? I'm an SE, like, how do I get out of past the barrier of I'm just a demo person to I have more expertise to be able to offer and let me offer it?
So it's twofold. First, it's with the brand of how the peers and the people that you work with know you. So do they know you as a financial services expert, or do they know you as an expert with a specific process or challenging customers, or how do they know your expertise? And, how are they engaging and connecting with you? There's that part. And I would encourage everyone, write out your brand. What do you want to be known as? And get feedback on it. I think of it as, it's the elevator pitch. If you met someone in an elevator, they said, "Hey, have you met Katie?" What are the 3 to 5 sentences they would say about you? That's first. Secondly, how you really put that out there, especially with customers, is how you introduce yourself. And I was actually just doing a coaching conversation with someone last week, and we talked about that. And that's where you set your credibility. That's where you set the stage of how they're going to direct questions to you, what they're going to think about, everything else that you have to say. So it's not just, "I'm Katie, I'm going to be your solution consultant, and I'll be showing you the demo today." That's going to put you in the functional box immediately. Are we checking all the requirements? This is the example that I gave. I'm Katie. I spent 20 years in cloud technology. I love working with HR, and I'm so glad I'm able to sit down with your HR team because you are the experts around the people and the processes. And I know how much you care about making sure that you're providing that right experience, and what you're doing is making work easier for your teams. And the other thing that I love about what we're going to get to talk about today is how valuable all of the data and the things that you're going to be doing is going to be touching every other part of the organization. So thank you for also inviting IT and finance here today so we can really have a holistic conversation. That sets a different expertise than I'm here to do the demo. And yes, it takes a little bit of time to say that. And sometimes we're really time conscious, worried that we only have an hour and they gave us 3 hours of content. But setting that right expertise of who you are and how you advise will let you skip ahead and give you a different kind of credibility for the rest of how you manage your time.
I really love that. Especially the personal brand thing, and what are the 3 to 5 things that you want people to know about you? Like that, to me, that's just huge advice, and something that whatever you're doing, you should be doing it all the time, right? Like wherever you work and whatever you have to be doing. So, Chris Mabry, I want to take the same question, but I want to ask it in the context of as a leader, as an SE leader, how do you help change the expectation on your organization? And it sounds like you do a lot of this already by getting your folks involved in lots of different things. Like, how do you drive that change as a leader through the organization to give your folks opportunities to get, to not just be the demo person, but to provide their maybe expanded expertise and leverage their other talents?
Love that question, Bill. I'm a big fan of walking around the virtual town square with a paper saying, this is what my team is doing to make a difference in the business. So you're walking around saying, this is what great looks like. This is what great looks like. And guess what? That is tied to the success criteria you have designed for your organization from the beginning. That success criteria, for me, I kind of define this role as helping prospects make buying decisions. So I'll take a tagline and I'll say our job is to help prospects make buying decisions. That's fundamentally different than our job is to provide technical demonstrations of product.
Sure.
It's a totally different level. If our job is to help prospects make buying decisions, that includes an umbrella of really creative ways to help buyers get through the noise in the market and make decisions for their business that will impact the overall health of their organization. And I'll go into leadership meetings saying, this is how we're doing it. Fundamentally changing also the culture within my organization by doing the same exact thing. I'll say, okay, our job is to make buyers' jobs easier, the buying decision. And this is what great looks like. Look at what Katie did. She actually reached out to somebody last week. Let's celebrate that.
I like it. Yeah, the positive reinforcement of the recognition of that activity and the result that it brought about. I think it is
everything is signaling, and every time we signal what we're actually doing, anytime we recognize anything or any great work, what we're doing is we're reinforcing the culture we want in our organization, internally and externally.
Yeah. I think, Chris, what you were just saying is very closely related to the idea that you shouldn't mistake the action for the outcome, that the action of sales engineering solution consulting is often providing the technical demo, having a functional conversation, but the outcome is helping the buyer to make a decision. And where I often try to walk the line between the two of those things when I'm talking about our role is I say, we are the experts in the sales process who help the library staff understand the decisions that they're making. So you can kind of reassure people that there's still that technical expertise, but not focus so much on, I'm going to open the demo site and click on things.
I like it.
I love, if you don't mind me interjecting real quick, because I love what you said about we are the experts on the process. This is something that I'm trying to, especially in enterprise, I think solutions engineers, if we get better at the buying process and the whole customer journey and understanding where decisions have to be made and who's making what decisions and how a CRO operates and how a legal officer operates, that is huge. I think that's a big trend for 2025. I'd like to see a lot of us talking more about how we influence that.
Definitely. I mean, I think you're sort of next level if you understand how a lot of these processes work.
Yes.
And then you understand the specific ones that apply to the customers you work with. In my world, a lot of that is understanding how things are purchased by publicly funded organizations. And then also understanding federal government procurement, which is something they could offer a PhD in, and you could still have more things to learn. So, knowing we could do also probably an entire webinar on understanding RFPs and how to work with them. But what I'll say about that is, if you see it as part of the game and you slot it in with these other things, then you can have success in that area.
Well, it's embracing the advisor mindset.
Right.
I'm not just a product expert, I'm an advisor. I advise on the product, but I also advise on process and the industry. I advise the product team. I advise the sales team. Like, if there's just one word you put on a Post-it note next to your desk to help you kind of keep this concept front of mind, just write the word advisor, because that's really the mentality that we're talking about.
I really like that. And I think, Justin Rossi, I was just looking at your question in the window. I think we absolutely answered that without having to explicitly answer. We went there. So I think that was good. All right. So we're unfortunately at the top of the hour. I can keep talking to y'all for like the rest of the afternoon, enjoying it. We're getting toward the top of the hour. I want to make sure that we leave some folks with some practical stuff, right? So I guess well, I'd like to ask each of you, as you're looking into the future, and we've talked about what we're going to stop doing, we've talked about what's potentially coming and all of that, what advice would you offer either the SE individual contributor or the SE leader to get themselves best ready to consume and capitalize on these coming changes in the role? And Chris, I'll start with you.
Oh man, that's such a good question, Bill. Wow. What I would say, I would give my younger self advice, and I would say, learn and ask your executives what they care about. What does your executive leadership team want to see from your solution engineering team? And work backwards. Get yourself a little bit more information and data on how they look at the business. You'll make better decisions when you have to make all those random decisions throughout the day of whether you do this demo or you push this one aside, or you follow up or you don't follow up. I think it has, as I have gotten more involved in running organizations, I now look at it and understand it a lot better. So that's what I would say.
I'll tell you what, I think that's awesome. Get yourself tied up to the business, because you can't lose when you're directly connected and affecting it, right?
And there's no executive that's going to say like, no, I don't have time for that.
Yeah,
they're going to love to talk to you about it.
Yeah,
and they want you more than ever, because the market is tough, right? They need your influence.
Yeah, 100%. All right, KDA, what's your advice?
I think I have two things that I would emphasize. One is maybe building on what Chris just said, and I think that's learning to ask good questions and also to be a good listener, and having a willingness to do that even when it's a little bit uncomfortable. That there may be situations, especially in a leadership role, and maybe especially if you're new to a leadership role, where you want to come bombing in with the answer, but you may not have all the information you need to actually know the correct answer. You need to be willing to ask other sales leaders what is really going on, and ask how your team can be supporting them better. I try to have that conversation with our regional sales directors and other people at that level at least a couple of times a year. Are you getting everything you need from us? Are there other things that we could be doing that we're not doing? That's a very important conversation to have, and it requires a certain amount of humility, and you need to be able to do that. I think something that is maybe on the flip side of that is that as a leader, but also as an individual contributor, if you're looking to advance, if you are looking to enter the field for the first time, you have to have a willingness to ask for what you want. And I'm not saying to come in and just make demands, but understand that if there are things that you need in order to be successful, you have to be able to articulate what that is. And if you're running a team and your boss comes to you, or your boss's boss comes to you and says, what does the team need to be successful in 2025? You have to have a pretty clear and concise set of bullet points. I mean, it really should be bullet points about what that is. And if you say, I don't really know, I'll get back to you, that's an answer in and of itself that you're not prepared to say that. So sometimes that can also be a bit of an uncomfortable exercise, asking for things that you want, but so often you don't get what you don't ask for. And I think especially those of us who maybe come from backgrounds where that's not something that we were taught to do. Women working in sales and working in tech companies, anybody who's a member of a minority group in some way, this may be an experience you're familiar with, where you were sort of given the idea that you should step back a little bit from that type of conversation. It's a conversation that if you become more comfortable having it over time, it will be less awkward. And that's often the only way to get things.
I think that's fantastic advice, Katie. Thank you. All right, Katie S., what have you got?
All right, we're in a climate of change. That's been the whole theme of what we've been talking about today. And I'm a big believer that change and learning have to go hand in hand. So I would just encourage everyone to pick at least one thing you want to learn this day. This year is something that's maybe uncomfortable, but is something you've wanted to really learn and you just haven't made the time, and lean into that. For me, it was coaching. It was something I always wanted to do. I view, like the feedback, the process we're doing as a leader leans into so much of that. But after I went through that, my head was like exploding with the applications for pre-sales, of how you can reframe questions, really tap into value, change a negative to a positive, use simple ways in your language to have a stronger impact that pulls your audience in. So whatever that is that you might want to learn, maybe it's AI, something you see in your industry that's changing, just embrace a learning mindset and curiosity, which is why we're all in pre-sales today.
Amen. I love that. And with that, Jack, I think we've had an amazing start to 2025 webinars from PreSales Collective.
This has been great. I can't think of a better way to start off the year with webinars. And we're right at the top of the hour. So to everyone who's joined in the chat, thank you for the great conversation in the chat. Really did appreciate everyone hopping in there. Bill, Katie, Chris, and Katie, thank you so much for being our first panelists of the year. A lot more content coming, and especially thank you to Reprise for being our premier sponsor and sponsoring this webinar as well. We can't do it without our partners, otherwise these events wouldn't happen. So thank you so much, and we'll see everyone in upcoming webinars. Make sure you hop into our Slack or follow the newsletter to catch when the next ones are going to be coming out. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.